Facebook Live, and I'm reporting to you from the Junior trial, Bronx County. He was 20 years old. He had made a deal to plead guilty. Good afternoon. This is Mary Murphy for Pix 11 Facebook Live, and I'm reporting to you from the Junior trial, Bronx County Courthouse. The star witness has taken the stand. Kevin Alvarez, 20 years old. He had made a deal to plead guilty in connection with the Junior case, and finally now, as we begin week 3, he got on the stand. He essentially pointed out the 5 other guys that are on trial for murder 1, and he said they were members of the Trinitarios gang. I have to tell you, Kevin Alvarez was not dressed like a gang member. He had on a lavender button-down shirt, navy chino pants. When he first got on the stand, he told the jury that he used to be a college student. He actually was studying criminal justice. He was also, he said, briefly in the U.S. Army until he had some kind of medical condition that forced him to leave the Army. He worked in construction. He once worked at McDonald's. But then he said, yes, in February of 2018, he got involved with the Los Sures set of the Trinitarios gang in the Bronx. He actually said that he thought it was cool, and he was going to some parties, and he knew a couple of guys with the gang, and that eventually he met some of the hierarchy in what he called the cabinet, and they asked him why he wanted to join the gang, and they warned him, you know, if you're involved in this, you might go to jail someday. But he decided to join, and he was put on probation. Essentially, he was only on probation for about 4 months until the Junior murder happened on June 20th, actually 11 months ago on this date. One of the things he said before, he said, I was made aware that sometimes you would have to jump people or stab people. And he also talked about missions that Trinitarios members were supposed to go on the direction of people in the hierarchy, the first man, the second man, and the third man. So this all built up to the day that Junior was actually targeted. And he said that day he had left a girlfriend's house and he went to a barbecue and he saw a couple of guys that were affiliated with the gang, and then they were told to go to the leader of Los Sures apartment building on Boston Road. He's been identified as Diego Suero. And at that point, he said there was a directive given that they had to go out looking for members of the Sunset division of the Trinitarios because someone from Sunset allegedly had shot one of their affiliated gang members a couple of nights before, and the guy had been shot in the head. Actually, it was someone who had a bullet lodged on the side of his eye. The person survived. So that was the reason they went out in a convoy of 4 cars. And Alvarez testified that he was actually driving his mother's car that night, a gray Acura. He was one of the 4 cars that were in that convoy. And he said when they got to an area near Adams Place, he actually didn't use the term Adams Place, he said the Belmont section of the Bronx. He talked about coming upon Junior, and he said Junior was just walking, and he was on his telephone, his cell phone. So what happened was, according to Alvarez's testimony, he said that one of the defendants in this case, whose nickname is Wolfanito, the defendant's real first name is Antonio, he said that he opened up the window and said something that Trinitarios used to address each other, that he called out Papo. And apparently a couple of the guys got out of the cars and they sort of surrounded Junior. And what Alvarez said was that the kid, these are his words, the kid just looked up, and at that point, people started stepping out of their vehicles. And he said Wolfanito got out of the car. And then he continued, Wolfanito and a few members of the Sures started approaching him and asking him certain questions. They were asking him if he was Sunset, and they were using a certain code to try to catch people that are with Sunset, 1090. And then he said, well, you know what, 1090 really has no meaning. It was almost like they were trying to trick Junior. And here's how he described Junior. He looked very surprised and scared, and he started running. And he said the only thing I heard Junior say was he wasn't a Sunset. Now, Junior's parents, his mother and father, were not in the court for this testimony, which there could be any number of reasons why they're not here, but they're not here for the star witness, at least in the morning session. There were some relatives of Junior's that I observed in court, but not his parents. Okay, so then he said, I heard them say, Junior, that he was not Sunset, and then he claims that one of the suspects, one of the guys known as Canalito, that's a nickname, one of the defendants in the case is Jose Muniz. Some people know him as the machete guy. Well, Jose Muniz, according to some witnesses, his nickname was Canalito. So Alvarez testified, all the guys made a gesture, Canalito, like they were gonna hit him, and he started running, speaking of Junior, who was 15 years old the night that this happened last June 20th. He said a couple of other people made gestures, and one person he also made reference to several times in the testimony was an alleged gang member with the nickname Pio. He identified Pio as Jonaiki Estrella Martinez. I actually switched the name around. It's Jonaiki Martinez Estrella is his name. And he's the one that the prosecutors have said early in the trial. They say Jonaiki is the one that actually had the knife that was used to kill Junior with a lethal wound to his neck. I mean, his jugular vein was sliced in the last seconds of the attack on Junior on the sidewalk. Anyway, the witness, Kevin Alvarez, did make reference to Pio. And the prosecutor said, oh, that's the man in the black tie. And that's the first defendant that's sitting at the defense table. Jonaiki is the first person at the table. And next to him is Muniz. So then Kevin Alvarez said, I started following Junior. He didn't know his name was Junior. He just thought he was a member of Sunset. He said, I started following him in my car. And at one point, he tried to block Junior's path. He tried to block him from running. And this was around 183rd Street and 3rd Avenue in the Bronx, very close, right across the street from St. Barnabas Hospital. And Junior somehow managed to get away from that car and keep running down toward the deli. That's the way Alvarez referred to it, as the deli. We've called it the bodega, but Alvarez was calling it the deli. So he said, I attempted to block the kid from running past the hospital, but it didn't work. Junior got away. Junior got another block down toward Bathgate Avenue and 183rd Street, and that's when he ran into the deli. And so Alvarez said, at that point, I reversed my car, I made a right on the block, and I went down toward the deli. He parked his car across the street from the deli, the bodega, at a construction site. And then he made reference, Alvarez, to another person who was sort of higher up in the gang. He said a member named Colita, who has been identified as Frederick Fenn. Alvarez said he was number 2 in the gang. He said, I was told by Colita to go in the store and take the kid out. He said 2 other people went into the store with him. You know, we've seen them on videos. He identified one as Minor, who was a Shure person, a Shure member, on probation. So that means he wasn't there that long. And he said the other kid was a Bad Boys member that he knew as Sosa. Now, we've talked about Sosa off and on in the last 11 months. His real name is Michael Reyes, and the prosecution has acknowledged in this case at the trial that he is a cooperating witness who has not, by the way, taken the stand yet. You will recognize him as having the dark shirt and the dark hat with the letter A on it when he marched into the store right behind Kevin Alvarez. Anyway, he said of Junior, he was behind the counter trying to hide. He was trying to go behind the owner of the deli. I was talking to the workers in the deli, said Alvarez, and I said that he was part of some shooting that happened to Chino. So then the prosecutor asked Alvarez, on June 20th, 2018, did you have any direct knowledge that this person, meaning Junior, was a Sunset member? And Kevin Alvarez said, no, ma'am. And he added, I thought the reason that we were chasing him was because he was a Sunset. And he said Junior was saying, no, I'm not a Sunset, and he hadn't done any of that. He said other people were yelling stuff at the deli workers, and he wasn't really paying any attention. And then finally, one of the workers said, according to Alvarez, and here's the quote, at that point, the deli guys told me they don't want any problems, take it outside. And then he said at that moment, one of the deli guys opened the door that was blocking the back. And so that's when Alvarez started to move in, and he said then that Junior went to try and close it. And that's when the testimony stopped before the lunch break at 1 o'clock. So very, very compelling hour of testimony in court as the star witness, Kevin Alvarez, 20 years old, took the stand and said that he was a probationary member of the Trinitarios gang, not full-fledged, when the chase and attack on Junior happened last June 20th. He actually identified the person accused of inflicting the fatal wound to Junior's neck, Jonaiki Martinez Estrella, as another probationary member. And what's interesting about that, if true, is that according to the way Alvarez explained things, if you want to move up in rank in the gang and become full-fledged, you have to carry out missions, and some of those missions may involve violence, sometimes intimidation, sometimes violence. So it's interesting that of the 5 people charged with murder 1 in this case, charged with having the weapons used to attack Junior, only one of those was on probation, and that is Jonaiki Martinez Estrella, who was accused by prosecutors of actually inflicting the fatal wound to Junior's neck, which sliced his jugular vein. He was lower ranking than the other guys that are charged with murder 1. The other guys were said to be first soldiers or second soldiers. So we learned a lot of vocabulary pertaining to the gang today, just in the last hour and a half. There's so much more testimony to come when court resumes at 2:30. We are going to be writing for Pix11.com to give you some highlights of the testimony. I will also be broadcasting for Pix11 News at 5 p.m. And then later this evening, hopefully around 7 o'clock, if not just after, I will be doing another Mary Murphy Files Facebook Live show, which we've called the Junior Trial. Since the trial started 2 weeks ago, we're entering the 3rd week.